What if the greatest maritime tragedy in modern history wasn't an accident? What if the icy North Atlantic wasn't the real killer? What if the Titanic that Titanic was used as a weapon not of war, but of finance? A weapon designed to remove the last few men standing between America and a private central bank, the same bank that prints your money today, that inflates your rent today, that dictates your debt, your interest rates, your future. Sounds insane, right? But here's the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask. Why were the three most powerful anti-central bank billionaires in America invited onto the same ship, the same maiden voyage, the same vessel that just happened to sink in the most convenient disaster of the century? What if the Titanic wasn't just a ship? What if it was a purge? Tonight, we're going to follow the money. And trust me, the trail doesn't go cold at the bottom of the Atlantic. Before we dive in, quick check-in. Where are you watching from? Comment your country. Our community is global, and the truth hits harder when you see how connected we all are. And if you're new, don't forget to subscribe for the unfiltered truth, the stuff they never teach you in school, in the news, or in any official history. Because once you hear what comes next, the story of the Titanic will never feel the same again. The shadow engine of global power, central bank liquidity swaps, the silent empire today. Liquidity swaps move over $1 trillion during crises. But their roots stretch back to the early 1900s, when bankers realized something extraordinary. If you can control emergency liquidity, you can control nations. Back then, international banking was messy, slow, fragmented, risky. A financial crisis in one country could not easily be smoothed over by another, unless there was a centralized lender, a coordinated alliance, and a mechanism to ship liquidity across borders without touching gold. The Federal Reserve would become that mechanism. But to build it, they needed political approval, public apathy, zero elite opposition. Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss killed number 3. The Titanic killed them. Now let's explain how the mechanism works in simple terms, but with the stakes fully exposed. How a liquidity swap really works. Imagine two central banks. The Federal Reserve, USA, Bank of England, UK. A crisis hits. Markets tumble. Banks freeze. Dollar shortages appear. What happens? The Federal Reserve, NBO, perform a swap line. The Fed creates dollars out of thin air. They swap them for British pounds. BO now has fresh dollars to bail out UK banks. The Fed holds British currency as collateral. No Congress, no vote, no public oversight. $1 trillion can move globally in minutes. Now imagine this power in the hands of early 1900s bankers, a world still dependent on gold, slow communication, and rigid currency systems. With such power, a cartel could crash markets, save preferred firms, destroy competitors, acquire global assets, fund foreign governments, trigger panics, or prevent them. This was not banking. This was financial warfare. And the Titanic. It removed the last men standing between America and the world's first truly global liquidity engine. To understand the conspiracy, you must understand the engine, not the Titanic's engine. The one far more powerful. The invisible engine underneath the modern global economy. Central bank liquidity swaps plus the birth of shadow banking. Because when you peel back the layers, what emerges is not a story about a shipwreck. It's a story about the creation of a global liquidity machine, designed to print stability for the elites and instability for everyone else. And the truth becomes clearer once you study the financial engineering that was already forming before the Titanic sank. Part I, why liquidity was the real weapon. Let's break this down in human terms. Liquidity is oxygen. No oxygen gives your body collapses. No liquidity gives the financial system collapses. Every bank, every corporation, every government depends on funding liquidity, the ability to borrow instantly, and market liquidity, the ability to sell assets instantly. But before 1913, the United States had neither. no central bank, no lender of last resort, no emergency liquidity, no mechanism to rescue banks or markets, no global backdoor to ship money across borders. Meaning? Bankers couldn't rig the system yet, not at scale, not globally, not quietly. The only way to create this rigged structure was to install a central bank and not a government one. A private central bank with public branding. That was the real goal. And the Titanic disaster cleared the chessboard. Part 2. The five-pillar system the Fed needed but opponents blocked. Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss weren't just saying no. They were blocking the creation of an international liquidity network with 5 critical pillars. Pillar 1. A central issuer of currency. They needed the power to print dollars without gold constraints. Pillar 2. A lender of last resort. They needed to bail out banks they favored and let others collapse. Pillar 3. A global swap network. They needed a way to send liquidity across borders without touching gold reserves. Pillar for a national debt machine. They needed a mechanism to force the government into perpetual borrowing. Pillar 5. A hidden backstop for shadow banking. They needed the ability to support the quietly emerging offshore banks, trust companies, and private brokerage houses that were already bending risk limits. These pillars defined today's system. But in 1910, 1912, they were plans without power. And the 3 men who could stop them were all on the Titanic. Part 3. How shadow banking was already forming. Most people think shadow banking began in the 1980s. Wrong, it began in the early 1900s. Trust companies, private merchant banks, offshore Eurodollar precursors, corporate money pools. London, New York private clearing circles. These were early versions of today's multi-trillion-dollar shadow system, the one that caused the 2008 collapse. And who opposed this quietly forming shadow network? Again, Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss. They understood the danger. When liquidity can be created without restraint, wealth can be stolen without limit. They weren't conspiracy theorists. They were insiders. And insiders are the hardest to silence, unless you physically remove them. Part 4. The numbers prove the motive. Let's tie this to real, quantifiable data, because this is where the dots connect with chilling clarity. Shocking number 1. $500 million. Astor's estate was equivalent to $500 million in today's dollars when adjusted conservatively. A man of that wealth had political gravity. He could block legislation. Shocking number 2. 7 men, 1/4 of global finance. The Jekyll Island architects represented 1/4 of the world's banking capital in 1910. Shocking. Number 3. $25 billion in 1913. The Federal Reserve Act created a framework that allowed over $25 billion in liquidity creation in its first decade. That's equivalent to $760 billion today. Shocking number 4. 1930s swap equivalents. Even in the early days, the Fedbo support function moved what would be $250 billion today through emergency mechanisms. Shocking number 5. Modern swaps, $6 trillion during the 2008 crisis. Fed swap lines provided over $6 trillion in global liquidity. This power didn't emerge later. It was the end game all along. And it required 3 things. A central bank, total legislative control. No powerful opposition. Exactly what the Titanic disaster solved. Part V. How the Titanic removal enabled the system. Let's timeline it. 1910, Jekyll Island meeting drafting begins. Oppositions include Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss. 1911, lobbying intensifies, opposition hardens. Newspapers owned by these men run pieces attacking the plan. April 1912, Titanic sinks. All 3 principal financial opponents die. J.P. Morgan survives because he simply didn't board. 1913, Christmas week, Federal Reserve Act passes, barely any Congress members present. Signed by President Wilson under massive banking pressure. 1914 onward, swap-like emergency operations begin fast-forward gives. This becomes the backbone of modern shadow banking. It's almost too perfect, too convenient, too clean. Because history isn't clean unless someone cleans it. Part 5. The hidden consequence. A global liquidity empire, once the Fed existed, the world changed forever. Let's connect the dots. 1. World War I. 1914 to 1918, the U.S. quietly funds European allies through liquidity extensions and credit arrangements. 1920 to 1930's global recession's Fed tools amplify both boom and bust cycles. 31944 Bretton Woods Federal Reserve becomes the backbone of the dollar's global dominance. For 1960s, 1970s euro-dollar markets explode, creating a shadow liquidity system off the books. 52008 crisis swap lines balloon to $6 trillion, rescuing foreign banks more than U.S. ones. 6-2020 crisis liquidity swaps restart instantly tens of billions per day. 7202-32025 shadow banking instability. Derivative exposures exceed $700 trillion. Feeding off the same system born in 1913, none of this could have happened without a central bank designed in secret by private bankers, signed into law with minimal oversight, immediately empowered to transfer unlimited wealth globally, and the path to that system began the moment the Titanic sank beneath the Atlantic. So here we are, full circle. A century after the Titanic slipped beneath the Atlantic, the mechanism built on its ashes now spans continents, markets, governments, wars, and crises. The liquidity machine the early bankers dreamed of is no longer a blueprint. It's the central nervous system of the entire global economy, and that should terrify you. Because today's liquidity swaps are faster, the shadow banking networks are larger, the leverage is higher, the derivatives are deeper, and the political resistance, it barely exists. The exact world Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss warned against is the one we live in now. A world where trillions can appear overnight, banks can be rescued in minutes, markets move without explanation, governments borrow without limit, and every crisis becomes a profit center for someone upstream the Titanic. Conspiracy isn't confined to 1912. It's alive, beating, expanding. In every liquidity line, the Federal Reserve pushes across borders. And here's the real warning. Asterisk, asterisk, the next collapse won't be slower. It will be instantaneous. No gold standard to slow the shock. No political debate to delay decisions. No geographical separation to contain fallout. We built a global system on borrowed time, and every swap line, every bailout, every emergency liquidity injection only extends the clock, never resets it. The moral of the story: when a system is built on engineered stability, collapse becomes a feature, not a bug. So ask yourself, are we wiser now, or just walking the same path in better suits? Before you click away, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Tell me your take. And if you're new here, hit subscribe for the next deep dive. We break the stories everyone else avoids. Because in a world built on half-truths, the unfiltered truth is the only lifeline you have left.